Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fast AVOD and SVOD, defining the new pay TV bundle. The phrase you just heard three of us say 3 times in a row. I'm Tyler Aquilina. I'm a media analyst for Variety Intelligence Platform, or Variety VIP. And I'm joined today by our 3 panelists here. Why don't you introduce yourselves real quick? Scott, why don't you start?
Sure. Scott Ehrlich, Chief Innovation Officer, Head of Corporate Strategy at Sinclair.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Gupta. That's loud.
Yeah, you're right up there.
I formerly was SVP of Streaming Strategy at Paramount Streaming for Paramount Plus and Pluto TV. And before that, at Paramount, worked on the launch of BET Plus in the SVOD space. And I currently am an adjunct media professor at Columbia Business School and teach a class called The Business of Television and Streaming.
That's cool. My name is Matthew Durgan. I am the Vice President of Content and Services for LG Electronics. We distribute televisions and a number of other devices with the WebOS operating system, manage all of our streaming partnerships, FAST, innovation, and also WebOS licensing and partner engagement out of our team.
Very cool. So we've got a nice diversity of positions in the streaming space represented here and the TV space, which we love to see. Now, obviously, the title of this session, as we know, is defining the new pay TV bundle. I want to start with bundling because this has become really kind of a major buzzword for the SVOD business. And I'm curious, for all of you, you can weigh in on this. Do you see bundling as, just another survival tactic that the legacy studios are undertaking as they've kind of sunk into the streaming business? Or is this something more potentially fruitful for the industry? Scott, what do you think?
Survival? No, I mean, I think it was inevitable, right? There's 2 things that we know for sure. Consumers want great content, and they want simplicity. And the great thing about the cable bundle for the last 40 years has been it's simple, right? It's really, really simple. Pay one price, get all the content you want. Right? Yeah. Pretty simple. So I don't think it was particularly hard or necessarily even game-changing to see the SVOD world coming back to some kind of a bundling strategy because there's still going to be that consumer need for just simplicity.
Yeah, back to what worked.
Yeah.
Sean, anything to add?
So totally agree. If we open up the history books, this is straight out of the cable company handbook. Broadband was Comcast's foray into bundling for their pay TV business. Then they added the landline, and we added home security. Then we added mobile services through the light asset MVNO programs. So I think we're just going back, as you said, 20 years ago, and kind of creating new value-add opportunities for the larger players. And also, I just think it is very fruitful, to answer your question directly. I think we have to think about the different types of bundling, right? So there's the hard bundles, the soft bundles, the billing bundles, the ingest bundles, the add-ons. And sometimes it's a safer way to launch in a new market is potentially to bundle with someone or partner with someone. And we've seen that in multiple instances for some of the larger players in Europe.
Yeah. Also, your alma mater, Paramount, has been in the news a lot in terms of joint bundles. I think there seems to be a new rumor every week about who they might be teaming up with. But Matt, what do you have to say about this trend?
First of all, I think those are 2 great points about this. The only thing I want to add on to it is if you think about streaming and why streaming became popular, it was because it gave consumers flexibility, right? It's great to have simplicity and great to have the content come to you in a way that is all-in-one solution or some kind of turnkey solution. But what consumers really told us when we started connected devices was that they wanted to have more choice and they wanted to have flexibility. And so the value to them was being able to right-size what they were paying for. And now the value is, okay, I am consistently paying these services, so how can these get bundled together so that I can get more value out of that?
Right. And the point about flexibility is interesting because as Sean mentioned, there's a lot of different types of bundles. We haven't really seen a lot of movement back toward one product, a la the cable bundle, where you pay one price out of a few providers, but you're essentially paying for the same service and you get everything. As much as some traditional media executives might like to get back to something like that, that just doesn't seem to be happening. And Matt, I'm curious, I think smart TVs are an interesting form of bundling that maybe doesn't get talked about in the same breath as much, but I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you see the role of smart TVs as kind of an aggregator or bundler in the streaming space.
Yeah, very fair question. I think there's a lot of responsibility from a smart TV perspective, right? Yeah. Because as a TV company, we are partners with virtually everyone who has any content. And giving choices to these companies in terms of how they are in the device. If they want to have an application, if they don't want to have an application, they just want the content into a fast environment. If they want to license the content. And so there are a lot of ways we have to connect content to consumers. And there's also legacy, right? Like if my favorite example on this question is LG channels, and it's the fast environment. LG was the first company that really looked at fast before it was called fast and said what really needs to happen here isn't another application on the TV. It's really got to evolve the EPG, right? Because consumers understand how EPGs work, and it's an integral part of building a television. So that is where that content should live, and what really has to happen here is an evolution of how that content is presented to
right. consumers. Real quick, can you define that term EPG just for people in the audience who might not be familiar?
Program guide. It's been part of television practically since television existed, right? I mean, I'm not sure.
There should be a magazine called TV Guide.
TV Guide. It's the perfect. It's the print version of an EPG, right? And so that never left our television. But until we evolved LG channels, so now the over-the-air and the streaming is really in one user interface, and it's a channel experience. It's up, it's down, it's seeing it from a time-based perspective. And so while it may not be financial bundling, it's content bundling, it's product bundling, it's innovation so that the whole experience improves.
Right.
And I think they've done a great job of owning that home screen. So when I worked at Time Warner Cable 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about who was going to own that initial user experience when you turned on the TV. And all of you have done an amazing job of actually moving forward with that and making it easier and bundling everything together. If you look at Inscape data from last quarter, that Inscape takes Vizio's 22 million users and looks at actually what they're doing. And 55% of those users are streaming exclusively. And so they've integrated everything into their EPG, everything into one place. And the fact that 55% of their users aren't using an HDMI 2 input is something that I know that maybe you're hoping for, but it's actually happening.
Well, when you think about those statistics too, I mean, HDMI could be anything, right? I mean, you can't automatically assume that HDMI is a traditional television box experience, right? It could be their camera. It could be a PlayStation. So we do look at that, the HDMI versus streaming, same type of numbers. But I think that's probably one of the most important things about being a smart TV manufacturer is you need to have an environment for everybody, right? Because that's what consumers expect out of the TV.
To your point about kind of owning the home screen experience, obviously there's a lot of competition for that, and not even just among hardware. I think there's a battle to control kind of the mobile experience as well. Obviously, people aren't just streaming on TVs anymore. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how are smart TVs and smart TV OS kind of positioned for maybe a future battle for consumer engagement with these other players in that space, because I do think that is going to be kind of a big front in whatever the next evolution of the streaming wars is going to be, is controlling that experience. Can you talk about that?
It's fair. The homepage of a smart television, obviously it would make sense if you thought about it just from the perspective of video, right? But televisions and connected devices in general are doing more than just video, right? There's audio partnerships, there's fitness partnerships, there's health, there's a ton of innovation that's happening in the smart TV space. So we have to think about the homepage as a front end to the entire device and everything that device has to accomplish, right? Which is, more than video. even if video is by far the number one most important thing that's happening in the device. I think one of the things that I came to this show feeling strongly about is that there's a lot of fragmentation happening in the market still, right? And we were talking about it just before we came up here, right? There's, legacy deals, legacy platforms, there's legacy ways that consumers are connecting to content, and there's the new ways. And one of the things that I feel like is getting lost here, and I just use this word all the time, every time I speak, is the tune-in, right? Like everyone kind of is in the mindset of build an AI and just throw stuff on the homepage that's one-to-one with that person. Now, of course, we'll go do that because that's part of our job as a television manufacturer. But I think it's also important for the owners of content, the owners of these stations, these networks, to try to find ways to promote themselves within these devices as well. They did that all the time in traditional television. It's a huge part. No, I'm not looking, sorry. I'm looking in this general direction, but I'll look over here too. I mean, the reality is that tune-in cannot go away, right? That still has to be a responsibility, and we have to provide that platform so that tune-in can happen, but also we need content creators and content owners to want to do tune-in messaging in a streaming platform.
And by the way, all kidding aside, I'll go back to what I said earlier, right? It's a lot about simplicity, right? When you talk about bundling, one aspect of that is the simplicity if I get one bill for a bunch of stuff. And maybe I can choose what stuff I get, and I'm sure consumer choice in bundling is going to be part of what we see in the future for sure. But the flip side of it is one of the biggest issues we have in the streaming world is discovery. So much content, so many places, it's hard to find the thing you're looking for, even if you know what you're looking for. And so the flip side of bundling is it should enable, I hope it enables, I expect it to enable better discovery experiences for consumer. And maybe they're driven by AI, or maybe they're driven by machine learning, or maybe they're a combination of the types of tune-in advertising that we've done on the television stations for many years evolved into that tune-in advertising feeding into a centralized interface for a bundled consumer.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. On the subject of tuning in, I think that maybe this will allow us to shift gears a little bit. Obviously, there's been a lot of chatter about FAST over the last couple of years, free ad-supported streaming TV, which is basically bringing that kind of linear channel experience to a streaming platform, streaming interface. Could all of you talk a little bit about, beyond the obvious being that it's free, what is the appeal of a service like that to consumers as they kind of deal with this fractured landscape?
Well, I mean, that's the first thing is free.
Right.
Like, my boss used to have a list of things that we never had to do research on. Number one was consumers will always like free.
Sure.
And so, once you establish that, it's great. But the other thing is, and it actually does dovetail from the discovery point, is a lot of times, I don't know what I want to watch. I just want something on.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's we're getting ready for dinner, and once we sit down for dinner, hey, we're going to start a show that we've been watching, this episode 6 or whatever. But in those 20 minutes, 25 minutes before we do that, we're not going to pick a show to watch while we're getting dinner together. But you want the TV on sort of as part of what you're doing in the evening, but not necessarily the focus of what you're doing in the evening. And I just think and certainly coming from a linear television perspective, linear television still works, and all the things about linear television that work on streaming. There just wasn't a place for it to happen. And I once said to my research team, this was a previous job, I said, are there on-demand people and linear people? Like, are they different humans? Or is the same person in different moods? And sometimes I'm an active consumer of content, and I know exactly what I want to go see. And sometimes I just want it to come to me. I just want to turn it on and sort of relax and not have to think through finding the show that I want. And I think that's a big part of why FAST has taken off. The other is, last point is really, cord cutting. And people have gone, they've grown up with the linear experience of X number of cable channels. And, what the FAST ecosystem's done, and Matt and LG were really at the front of this, creating, and certainly Pluto, we're recreating these linear experiences. And I mean, we saw early on, Pluto, I guess, just had its 10th anniversary. I remember when they launched, and a whole bunch of us went, oh, I wish I'd thought of that. So.
I'd be very curious to see the results of that survey. You know, the active versus passive content consumption is something I think about a lot.
It turns out, the short answer is, it turns out it's the same person in different moods.
Sure, sure.
But what the data shows is what works on SVOD is very different than what works in FAST. So if you take some of the major players' reality shows, or library sitcoms or procedurals, those work really, really well on FAST. So it's kind of like the old binge model. If you want to create a channel with 24/7 episodes on CSI or some reality show, those work really well. NBCU launched the 24/7 Kardashian channel. It probably does better in FAST than it would on SVOD.
It's like commitment viewing.
Right.
Right. I'm watching episode 1, and I know if it's any good, I'm in for the next 30 episodes. I can kind of watch it and move on.
But is there room to kind of meld those two models? I don't know if anybody saw yesterday, there was news that Disney is working on building these linear streaming channels into Disney Plus. I personally think that's a big opportunity that some of these services haven't really explored yet. Sean, maybe you can speak to this. So why have more services not done that, and what is the opportunity there?
Yeah, so I think earlier this morning, Matt Strauss was here. He was talking about NBC Peacock did launch with he said a couple dozen, dozens of channels. The way I think about it is everyone had a core focus when they launched. And I think over time, everyone's looking to add more and more value to their streaming service and needs to strategize of when to align a price increase with those value-added services. So I think everyone probably has on their roadmap to add more live channels to their SVOD service. But is it 24? Is it 2025? What's going to be my price increase? There's a lot of room in the market to increase prices for some of the major services.
Yeah.
And I think they're just looking at the opportunity.
For sure. I mean, Warner Brothers Discovery has already been experimenting with that. The live sports Bleacher Report tier on Max. They've recently launched CNN content on there. Scott, maybe you can kind of weigh in on this too. How can integrating this live sports and news content be kind of a benefit for these SVODs?
Well, when I think about content, I think about content in 2 large buckets. One is acquisition content, which is the type of content that gets consumers to change their behavior. Download an app they don't have before, buy a device they don't currently own, switch to a channel that they never watch. That's acquisition content. It's a very high bar. Or retention content. And retention content is the type of content, I called it like commitment viewing a minute ago, but retention content is that type of content that you watch day in and day out, and so you get value from whatever service it is you're getting it from. And it used to be predominantly the cable operators, and now it's a combination of cable and FAST, and those channels are a little bit different. But then there's acquisition content. And sports is the most easily understood form of acquisition content. Like if you're a New York Yankees fan, a Japanese baseball team is not going to substitute for the New York Yankees.
Right.
You want the New York Yankees. That's your team. That's what you want to watch. And people will go to extraordinary lengths to watch their teams and watch their teams live. And that's why sports rights are expensive. The NFL is the ultimate expression of that, which is why they get more money than everybody else, right? You get 17, soon to be 18, you got 17 games, and that's it. You don't have baseball, 182 games. Like, it's a little too much for my ADD, but that's why those are so powerful. And so then when you look at streaming services, one of the biggest challenges that streaming services have is customer acquisition. Customer acquisition battles in the app stores, they add up. Like, they get really expensive really, really quickly. And so if you can move the customer acquisition needle by having a Thursday night football game or a Saturday night playoff game, NFL playoff game, it's significant. And if you look at the Peacock numbers from their wild card game, you should not be stunned that the next thing Amazon did was get themselves a wild card game for next year.
Yeah. While we're on that topic, I think regional sports networks have been a big topic of conversation recently. I know Sinclair is a big player in that space. Is there room for that kind of specificity on these big SVOD platforms? I know ESPN recently integrated not streams of the RSNs themselves, but like portals to stream RSNs. Is there room or opportunity for greater integration of those kinds of networks onto these large platforms?
Remains to be seen. I mean, the thing that's never going to change is in any given community, the most logical passion is for that local team. And so the notion that, people in New York aren't going to seek out ways to watch the New York Knicks is silly. They will. How those things find a way to coexist, I don't know. But I think, look, we're going through a period of change where, the cable bundle was the predominant way that all high-value content was delivered to consumer homes, virtually all. We're going to a world where it's more about streaming, it's more about hybridization. In between is a whole lot of awkwardness. And right now we're living through an awkward period where a lot of this stuff is transitioning from what was a very well-established business model to a business model that, let's be honest, we're all still figuring out. And as we work through the awkward period, some of the high-value content gets sort of stuck in kind of where it was and where it's going and how long it's going to take to get there. But the thing that's never going to change is any particular town's passion for their sports franchise. That's always going to be important.
Scott, I love that. I agree with everything you just said, but there's a contrarian position on this that I actually just heard like an hour and a half ago, a statistic that 99% of a team's fans have never been in their team's stadium or ballpark or
that
whatever
doesn't surprise
park,
me.
right?
Yeah.
And I think the idea that sports, because media has gone global, and as a culture, humanity, we've also all reached, a lot of us anyway have gone to places other than where we grew up, and so there is a need to continue to find ways to push that content. I agree, you have to protect your kind of regional areas, and there's some protection that has to happen, just really for the integrity of the league and for teams not to step on each other's local fan bases.
Yeah, but also because he was asking about the regional networks, which only control the local rights.
Yeah.
And look, if you look at kind of how these things have played out, the Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NHL teams, which have been primarily on cable for the last 20, 30 years, are now really having to dig deep and reinvent how they connect with their local communities and how they broadcast to their local communities as all this changes. The NFL has been on national television all the time,
True.
Right? And they've never really gone away from having the vast majority of NFL content on over-the-air broadcast television, which certainly we are of the camp that continues to be important. But the teams that have significantly more games in their season and have been in the cable business, they're having to sort of take a step back and go, okay, how do we really do this? And you see, in Phoenix, in Utah, in a few other places, those owners are kind of going, okay, how do I want to think about the team's relationship to that local community going forward? Because obviously things are changing.
Right.
Yeah, this all kind of gets at something I think about a lot, which is, as we move forward into, the streaming age, are these kind of niche, audiences going and niche services just going to be kind of folded into larger platforms, or can there be a space for smaller services with smaller audiences, but passionate audiences, I think that's a big topic that, can be revisited a lot as this landscape of bundling kind of evolves further.
Yeah, there's no question, but there's over time there's a pretty clear correlation, which is the nichier the content, the more a need for a subscription revenue stream to make it sustainable. Mm-hmm. The broader the content, the more likely it is you can have an ad-supported only approach to how you produce and distribute that content. And it's just sort of like, where along that continuum does any particular offering fall? And then hope you guessed right about your particular
Yeah, for sure.
To answer your question, so I think there are some niche networks and niche services that serve a demo for a very specific purpose. I think those will continue to exist. Then there's some niche networks and niche services that are kind of general entertainment in nature and can kind of be rolled up or fit into another service. I just think it's hard for them to sustain a business model where they can afford to, run their own D2C business with that kind of general market focus.
But that's actually, that's where bundling starts to help some of these more targeted or nichier content services.
I think also if the user interfaces can become more customizable and can create targeted interfaces so that you can turn on your TV and either actively set the channels you want, so we can build up niche audiences so that they're actually decent sized and can participate in every economy, whatever's available to content. Yeah. We might be able to tackle some of that with the product problem. And I think because of things like AI and advancements in search and discovery that we're all pushing for in the next year, I think you'll see more opportunities for niche content in the future, not less. It's going to go in the right direction.
Great.
Interesting. To go a little bit deeper on kind of the content side of it all, obviously FAST historically has been kind of a, I don't want to say repository necessarily, but a place for, types of content to live, which are, as you say, kind of more lean back type of programming, game shows, older procedurals, reality shows, that kind of thing. But now as we've seen SVODs start cutting back on original programming spending, it seems like, some of the FAST providers are starting to move more in that direction. Tubi and the Roku channel have really started to push into original content. I'm curious for your guys' thoughts, can FAST pick up some of the slack in the realm of original content that is kind of falling away from SVOD now?
So
Totally
I think the answer is yes, but for very specific genres, right? So the days of, these are public numbers, the days of, 1 hour dramas at $6 to $10 million, or a Disney Plus show that's $22 million for 30 minutes, right? Or a cowboy drama for $20 to $30 million an hour. Like, I don't think the FAST services can pick up that type of programming.
Right.
But can they take a page out of Amazon's playbook and invest in something like Judge Judy and then geniusly syndicate it back to the broadcasters? Absolutely. So I think there's, again, we were talking earlier about there's certain types of content that work on FAST and there's different types of genres that work on SVOD. We just you look at the data, we have enough data now across everyone's different services, what works there, and maybe potentially invest in original programming in those genres.
Yeah, and actually, to your point, there are at least 3 shows that I've seen that will be on television stations and syndication next year that started on streaming. So Judy Justice is one of them, and there are a couple others, and we are starting to see ad-supported streaming, not specifically FAST per se, but ad-supported streaming, starting to become the place where new shows can go find their audience and then come back to broadcast, or have broadcast as a I don't really want to say a second window, but as an enhanced window. We'll go with enhanced.
Sure.
If I was the portfolio manager, to answer your question, and I had to figure out where to invest content, I would invest in what I call utility programming. So if I was to invest, to figure it out for you, I'd be like, where can I invest to make sure that someone comes to my EPG or to my service on a daily basis? And so my theory is that the utility programming drives daily usage, right? I can't have you come to my service or my platform for 1 hour a day.
How are you defining utility program?
So we got sports, local, news, weather, broadcast hubs, even court TV I put into that now recently. So programming where hopefully someone will remember, it's the same way that utility programming drove your local broadcasters, right? So anyone that's kind of phasing back or cutting back from that, maybe LG can start to provide some of that on a daily basis. So they turn on LG, right? They have their local, their sports, their news, their weather all there. It reminds them then to go to that hub on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think one of the ways of simplifying some of this might be to say there might be a huge jump from a reality unscripted, which I think is completely doable and achievable for LG. And I've already done original programming with David Chang. We've done original programming with Matthew Berry in fantasy sports. We work with NCAA. Some of this content, to me, it's not scripted. You're not talking about a dramatic effect. You're not talking about, theater. You're really just talking about life and getting it on TV. Yeah. And I think that's already been achieved. You could take it slightly higher and you could look at the Jury Duty example, because Jury Duty crushed it. Yeah. And it wasn't scripted, but it wasn't not scripted. Right. There was some element of pre-planning,
TV.
right?
Court TV, yeah.
But it wasn't like, we're just going to stick some people in there and make it dramatic court. They actually had a plan to make it entertaining, right? And it wasn't scripted, but it also was very contrived, right? So you have something, but then you can take it to the level where you're trying to create the next sitcom or the next, and this is where Tubi came in, right? Because Tubi's actually been doing scripted originals, and they've been doing it with AVOD only. It's a big leap, and it's impressive, but it's clearly, as you get more scale, you can start taking those bets.
And they've been doing some scripted movies also,
right.
like MOWs. Yeah.
But I'll also say, listen, I wear multiple hats. One of which is I do oversee our original content at Sinclair, and one of the things that I have said and was quoted on when somebody was pitching us a show, and our people were insisting on exclusivity, and they're like, really, here's a slide. I think it takes a cocktail of windows. Like, none of these shows really that are of value can survive on one distribution path. And so you're seeing, and it started with some talk shows, like Sherry Shepherd, Wendy Williams, they would have a syndication window, and they'd stack the windows, right? It'd be in syndication, it'd be on Bounce on multicast, they'd have a streaming clearance, and then they put clips on YouTube. And stacking those windows allows you to make a show profitable, whereas any one of these windows on its own is really hard. And something like Jury Duty, which was, if anybody hasn't seen it, transcendent show on Freevee, and really just transcendent creative. And you have Amazon sitting behind that saying, okay, we have a bigger place that we're going. So I don't know how much they really dug into sort of the unit economics of that show per se. But for the rest of us that are producing shows, like when we're looking at a game show or a talk show or a court show or any of the types of things that we would produce for the stations, that's part of the mix, because you can't sort of just say, hey, we're going to produce it for here, and that's the way we're going to make money. And it's both an economic problem, but it's also an audience problem. Like, you want that show to be wherever the audience is when they want to watch it.
Right. So you can foresee a world where, say, there's an original series that comes out on SVOD, it kind of exhausts its audience there, and then, maybe a couple years later, they window it to a fast service to kind of re-energize the
I don't know why
audience.
that's any different than shows.
Everybody does that already.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not really any different than what HBO has been doing for many, many years.
Sure. Makes sense. I think
we're talking about the reverse window. Something's premiering on Fast now, and then when does it get syndicated to other platforms, and how?
Yeah. That's interesting. I also want to talk about advertising before we get out of here, because obviously that's another just such a huge topic. I think people often talk about, especially with regard to these SVOD platforms that are now integrating AVOD, like Disney Plus. There's a question of how much are consumers going to tolerate ads? How many ads are consumers going to tolerate? Matt, maybe you can weigh in on this. What kind of approaches, maybe innovative approaches, can CTV advertisers take to avoid that problem of consumer frustration?
Oh, well, first of all, let's be clear about where the responsibilities are, right? Because I think the advertisers are going to put their money into platforms that aren't doing that to their consumers, right? It's up to the platform, it's up to the people running the services that's generating the advertising inventory to have the transparency into the consumer base to know that when they do something, right, they're not driving hours down or driving MAUs down. And you see, sorry, let me talk about that. So monthly active users, right? Or the hours of usage that's happening on the platform. You start making decisions in terms of how many pods you put in or how long the breaks are, or how many advertisers you have feeding into, your programming, and all of a sudden you see changes in your population. It's up to the platform to maintain a very healthy environment. And advertisers see healthy environments, and then they invest in healthy environments with their brand messaging. And so I think you have to be clear about what your role is in establishing a healthy ecosystem so that advertising can thrive in that environment. And that's the responsibility of every service that has ads. It's the responsibility of every platform that has advertising inventory. It's a group effort. If anybody starts getting to the point where you create an environment where people don't want to tune in, it's very easy. That service just has to go away and become something else.
Yeah, I also think, the effect of a generation that has grown up watching YouTube with ads is a very real thing. And, I have a 20-year-old and a 23-year-old. They could not care any less if things had commercials. Like it just does not bother them. I don't know if they're actually absorbing the commercial messages or not, but it's certainly not something that bothers them. It keeps them off of YouTube and sends them to all of the services we have that are commercial free. They still spend their time on YouTube watching the ads. So I don't know that within boundaries we have to think about how we're managing ad load, and I think that's one of the opportunities of FAST and other digital platforms. But I don't necessarily think that consumers are just going to reject advertising. Like I actually see my kids watch more ads than I do, which is I probably should not have said that into a microphone.
But also two things. I mean, I think people forget, or when we sit in rooms like this, I think people forget that Americans want optionality. Mm-hmm. Not all Americans can afford 5 premium SVOD services. They want, they want options. They want to come in at lower price points, and they're happy to watch ads to come in at those price points, right? Yeah. We're trying to create as many different options for consumers at different price points so they can put different packages together.
I do want to play devil's advocate with something you said, Scott, just a little bit, because I also grew up, watching YouTube with ads. And frankly, I'm not that much older than your kids, and I think that the ad loads on YouTube are starting to get to a point that's very, very frustrating to me personally. And I do wonder about if a platform, obviously kids are spending a lot more time on TikTok now. They're still watching a lot of YouTube, but TikTok is not quite as ad heavy as YouTube, at least not yet. I'm curious, as other platforms that may not even exist yet kind of come along and are offering a less ad-heavy experience, whether younger people might start to tip away from that, or if they'll just kind of accept, the higher ad loads.
So I mean, let's be clear. What I was saying is they're very tolerant of watching ads. Mm-hmm. What Matt said is spot on, right? There is a point at which you're abusing the fact that they're not that bothered by ads, right? And you're overdoing it. And is YouTube at risk of that? I don't know. I haven't really measured their ad load recently, but there is definitely, I mean, look, when I started in television, like we have these multicast networks, right? And which are free over the air broadcast networks. And a lot of what they do is they bring library shows that have been very popular back to kind of life. So we have a network called Charge. Charge has Chips. Chips was a show that aired in the late 70s, early 80s. Fantastic show. We've had it on the air for 6 years, just renewed it. But when that show came in, the running time on the episodes averaged 53 minutes, implying that the network ad load at the time the show was made was about 7 minutes an hour.
Right. What's it, 47 now?
I'm not going to go into necessarily what our ad loads are today, but let's just stipulate it's more than 7 minutes by a lot. And so all platforms, whether it's broadcast television or it's fast channels or anything else, you have to be thoughtful of, and just echoing what Matt said before, you have to be thoughtful about managing your ad load. You have to understand where the consumer tolerance is, how your economics work, and then find a balance point, keeping both of those things in mind. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of lose their way on ad load is they're so focused on there's a number I have to make, and the easiest way for me to make it is put another ad in the pod. You can get away with that a little bit, but there does come a point where you are taxing it too hard, and you will cause some backlash, I think.
So Tyler, to answer your question also from 5 minutes ago, if you walk the floor here, there is a theory that in 2 years, the ads will be much more customizable using all the advances in AI from a post-production perspective. So the ad that Scott gets will be very different than the one that I get, which may make it more bearable, right? They're gonna be able to swap out creative much quicker, right? Swap out characters, swap out backgrounds. And if you can customize the ads and give it to the right person at the right time, it may be more bearable. That's the theory.
Right. That is the theory. Yeah. I mean,
Or the brand messages and the advertising will migrate into the programming.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I was getting at. I mean, virtual product placement is something not even that we're just talking about. We're already seeing it, you know. So there's definitely room to potentially expand that, I think. I don't want to get out of here without talking about virtual MVPDs, because I think those are kind of a part of the bundling and streaming ecosystem that can sometimes get left out of the discussion sometimes. For those who don't know, those are basically virtual cable providers like your Hulu Plus Live TVs, your YouTube TVs, that kind of thing. Scott, I know there's been a bit of tension between station owners and these virtual MVPDs over, you know, carriage of local affiliates, how those negotiations play out with streamers versus traditional pay TV providers. I'm curious for your perspective on how the business can evolve toward a future that, you know, allows broadcasters to exist on these platforms more easily.
Yeah, I mean, and what Tyler's referring to is with a normal MVPD cable operator, the stations negotiate their deals directly with the cable operators. And the virtual MVPDs, the FCC does not consider them to be the same as a regular MVPD, and so they're not subject to the same regulations. And what happens is the network negotiates on behalf of all of the affiliates. Our point of view is very clear. An MVPD is an MVPD. We should be negotiating our deals directly with all MVPDs. I don't think there should be any ambiguity around that. The technological difference is frankly irrelevant. It's the business model. They're in the same business with the same business model. We have the same relationship with them. We should be able to run our business. And I do think it will get there, despite some of the recent sort of moves around it, but it almost has to get there. Having said that, all of the networks that we are affiliated with do have deals with the virtual MVPD. So we have very strong relationship with the virtual MVPDs. It should just be a more direct one.
Yeah. Is that something you see being achieved just through, you know, these companies agreeing to change their business practices, or does there need to be kind of more regulatory influence on that? What do you think?
Well, the whole process around retransmission consent and must carry rules and whatnot, that is very much a regulatory process.
Yeah. So we're just about out of time, but I just want to hit a quick lightning round question to each of you in turn. What is the most exciting trend you see in the OTT or direct-to-consumer space right now, Matt?
The most exciting OTT trend? I think probably the most exciting OTT trend at least for LG, is being able to get closer to content creators, provide opportunities for content creators to come onto the platform. I already talked about David Chang. You know, David Chang's a highly successful cook. You know, Momofuku, amazing restaurant here in Las Vegas. He wanted to make content, and he wanted to build a studio, and we had a platform that we could do that with him. We put LG appliances in his studio. We have this kind of home appliance, LG brand, you know, unique original programming on LG channels, just this all-in-one solution that gives us a platform to talk about our FAST platform, LG channels, our appliances, and we couldn't have done that 10 years ago, right? I mean, this LG now gets to be very close to the content community and to give opportunities to content creators that they might not have had if we didn't establish FAST and if we didn't build that platform out.
John?
I think mine ties to what I was talking about earlier about the changes coming in addressable advertising from a creative perspective. So there's a lot of, everything that we thought was a huge challenge in post-production that took a lot of time will just be sped up through all of the advances in AI. So you can de-age me faster in post-production. You can sub and dub Scott into Italian immediately, right? You can change the color of Matt's jacket and remove a logo if you need to. And that would take a lot of time, years ago. And I think by 2026, it'll just be sped up at a really interesting speed, and we'll be able to create content that we can deploy globally much faster than we can today.
Well, first of all, I'm in much more desperate need of de-aging than you are. So kind of wish you'd send that my way. But I think it's quality. We started building fast channels in 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. And we would talk to people and be like, any crap you have, just string it into a channel, like we need channels. And now, over the last 2 years in particular, you've seen a weaning and kind of a flight to quality in those channels. It's allowed us to, we launched the fast channel T2, which came from the tennis channel, which has live tennis matches, a pickleball channel, a bunch of other channels, and that flight to quality in fast, I think that's the most exciting thing, because that to me is an early sign of sustainability. And when we're looking to invest in a business, we're looking to invest in it for the long haul. And so it being sustainable is one of the key metrics we're looking for. And quality is a good indicator of sustainability.
Yeah, well said. All right, so that is the time we have. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you to my panelists, Scott, Sean, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.